with details on the hunt for more accomplices. Good morning, Benjamin.
Yeah, good morning, Heather and Rob. Look, we've seen these kinds of attacks all too often recently. A vehicle being used to mow people down indiscriminately. Of course, what makes this one different is that this was targeted at Muslims who had just finished their Ramadan prayers. And now this is being called a terrorist attack, and it's being investigated by the counter-terrorism unit here. It happened just after midnight near a Muslim center just behind me, and one man is now dead, over 10 injured. And it happened at a time when many Muslims were out on the streets trying to celebrate the end of Ramadan, and now community members here trying to avoid division. But the stories that we hear of bodies strewn across the roads, the desperate attempts to save some of that one person are now coming out, and there is still anger here. Police have arrested the driver, as you say. He's a 48-year-old white man. He was grappled to the ground by two bystanders until the police arrived. Those two men are being called heroes, and eyewitnesses have also reported that he said a number of times, "I've done my bit and I want to kill Muslims."
He waited outside the mosque. His target was Muslims, and as he knew exactly what time he finished prayer, so as soon as people came outside the mosque, like basically they were having a chat, he started plowing his van into us. Like, so people was moving out of the way, people were screaming.
People here really just keeping the tensions low, trying to reduce the chance of anything flaring up. You know, this is a city which has seen so many attacks in recent months, and police now coming out and saying that there are no other suspects. Helicopters still circling above, a large police cordon trying to keep people away from the scene here. And while some community leaders are pointing out that this was an attack on Muslims, this was actually an attack on all the communities here, but still real tensions. People calling this a revenge attack. Back to you guys.
Yeah, certainly appears that way. Okay, Benjamin, thank you so much. And here to react to this, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who is a former U.S. Navy commander and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. He joins us now. Doctor, thank you for coming back. We'll get right to the last thing that Benjamin was just talking about here. Obviously, you know, it appears this might have been a retaliation attack after we've seen a number of attacks called for by ISIS there. Obviously, it's not an intelligent way to go about things, and there's no logic to it, but is it surprising to see with all the anger that's in London right now?
Well, this is exactly why ISIS does what it does. Why does it divert its attention from the war in Syria and Iraq to attack the West? Because it wants to recruit more jihadists, and the way to do that is militancy stimulates other militants. And what keeps our society free is our rule of law. And when vigilantes try to take things in their own hands and commit acts of hate and heinous violence, this feeds right into the playbook of ISIS. So, you know, we just heard there was an imam down the street that actually, when the perpetrator was found and being apprehended, protected the guy to make sure the Muslim mobs did not attack him as they were screaming things at him. So, you know, we see that there are Muslims that the majority of whom believe in the rule of law. And last week in the fire, the Grenfell fire, there were thousands that were possibly saved because Muslims that were awake at this early hour called alarms, called the police because the alarm system in that building wasn't working. So we need to respond with protecting religious freedom, not only talking about the militants that are the end point.
Now, this particular mosque, it used to be associated with radicalism, but now it does claim to be moderate. Tell us a little bit more what we know about this mosque and this specific neighborhood.
Well, again, the narrative as we see it right after 9/11, there were some pretty militant imams coming out of there, be it Al-Masri and Hamza and others. It was actually shut down because it was raided and then reopened with new leadership. Now, I'm not ready to call it a moderate mosque. There's affiliations with the Brotherhood, some anti-Israel issues that may have come out of there, but, you know, hold on, as we are barely 12 hours from this act, we don't fight even nonviolent Islamism with a sense that somehow we're going to feed into the violent cycle that ISIS wants. We defeat ideas that are radical, that feed into radicalism with the antiseptic of sunlight. We need to work as a community to realize that Islam is in that time in history in which we have to defeat theocracy, both abroad and at home. We're finding that most of the militants are homegrown because the ISIS narrative of separating us out of society is actually working. So to break that cycle, we need to not only fight the endpoint of the terrorists when they put on that belt, but before the separatism of Islamist theocracy.
Yeah. And if you are, as most are, a good Muslim and a God-fearing Muslim, this is the time to just come out and say, you know, I join the rest of the world in condemning this and these horrible acts of violence. They must be more frustrated than just about anybody else. Doctor, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get to some other news now. A sailor's mother describes her son's urgent efforts to save his comrades aboard a doomed Navy destroyer. Mia Sykes' 19-year-old son, Braden Hardin, kept diving into the flooded compartments of the USS Fitzgerald after colliding with a cargo ship near Japan. He kept going until all of those areas ran out of air pockets. All 7 sailors killed in the collision have now been identified. Most of the crew was sleeping when this happened. Still no word on what exactly caused that accident.
Well, a U.S. fighter jet shooting down a Syrian warplane. The U.S. military says that the action was taken after the pro-Assad military jet dropped bombs on U.S.-backed fighters near the city of Raqqa. The shoot down is the first of a Syrian aircraft by the U.S. military since it began fighting ISIS in the country in 2014. It could bring more tension between the U.S. and Russia, which backs the Syrian regime. And Iran firing a barrage of missiles to get revenge on ISIS. Iranian TV showing video of several medium-range missiles launched into eastern Syria. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says the large number of terrorists were killed and weapons destroyed. Now, this was a response to the terror group attacking Iran's parliament and shrine earlier this month. You may remember, killing 17 people.
All right, going to get into some domestic politics now. President Trump stacking up his legal team as frustrations with the Russian probe heat up.
He is expected to address the nation this week as the president's lawyer denies he's under investigation. Griff Jenkins is live for us in Washington, D.C. with more. Good morning, Griff.
Good morning. Is he or isn't he under investigation? Rob and Heather, that is the question the White House is facing today. The president's outside lawyer, Jay Sekulow, took to the Sunday shows, vehemently refuting the claim, stressing that, quote, the president is not under investigation, saying that no one has notified him that the president is being investigated. In seeking to clarify that question in an exchange with our Chris Wallace, things got very testy at times.
Here's what you're trying to do, Chris, and I appreciate
now you're reading minds again. Now you're reading minds again.
No, Chris, I deal with fact and law.
Well, then don't tell me what I'm trying. Then don't tell me what I'm trying to do, because you don't know what I'm trying to do. Actually, what I'm trying to get is a straight answer out of you.
And this comes after the president tweeted on Friday that he was under investigation for firing FBI Director James Comey, and he continued to vent frustrations over the weekend with the Russia probe, calling it, quote, a witch hunt multiple times, the most recent yesterday, saying, quote, the Make America Great Again agenda is doing very well despite the distraction of the witch hunt. Meanwhile, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, is accusing the White House of leading a scorched earth strategy to take down and discredit special counsel Bob Mueller, who's leading the Russia investigation.
If a foreign government, in this case Russia, has something that they can hang over the head of our president or our administration that can influence U.S. policy, it is very much in our national security interest to know it, and we need to conduct this investigation.
And remember those tapes? We heard from Jay Sekulow also yesterday that he says the president may address that later this week, guys.
The infamous tapes.
Yes.
All right,
Do they
Griff.
exist or not?
Exactly. Griff, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, Congressman Steve Scalise's condition continues to improve. He has now been upgraded from critical to serious condition. The House Majority Whip shot at a baseball practice in Virginia last week. He sent this Father's Day message on Twitter, urging people to, quote, take the time to be close to the ones you love. Republican Congressman Rodney Davis echoing that same message.
I can tell you this is the best Father's Day I've ever had, to be able to come back home and see the outpouring of care and support from the people that know me best, including my family. Has just been a really humbling event and very memorable for me and my family.
Davis also renewing the call for politicians to stop all this political rhetoric, this violent rhetoric. Come together. 3 other people were shot when James Hodgkinson opened fire in what appears to be a politically motivated attack.
Well, some of America's top tech bosses expected to meet with President Trump today. Our commander-in-chief inviting CEOs, including Apple's Tim Cook and Amazon's Jeff Bezos, to the White House to talk about modernizing the government's technology. President Trump has slammed the system as outdated, saying that the nation is an easy target for cyber attacks.
All right, Brooks Koepka, you've probably never heard of him, but he's claimed his first major title with a victory at the U.S. Open.
Koepka, a major champion.
The 27-year-old winning the U.S. Open by 4 shots. He was able to grab control with 3 straight birdies on the back 9, matching Rory McIlroy's U.S. Open record, finishing at 16 under par.
This is just a bonkers score for the U.S. Open. Koepka is the 7th straight first-time major champion in men's golf. It's very strange times in men's golf.
Yeah, definitely very strange times.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful course there, though.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Well, the time now is 10 minutes after the top of the hour, and we continue to follow breaking news out of London. A man plowing a van into a crowd of pedestrians. That incident now being investigated as a terror attack. National security analyst Ryan Morrow weighs in up next.
Also, cell phone crackdown. The state looking to ban preteens from owning a cell phone. So should an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old have a phone? We report, you decide.
And Colin Kaepernick is back in the headlines this morning. What he said on Twitter that has social media sounding off.
Well, a van driving into a group of worshippers at a mosque just hours ago in London. Police now investigating this as a terror attack.
Here to weigh in, National Security Analyst Shillman Fellow for the Clarion Project, Ryan Morrow. Thank you very much for joining us, Ryan, this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So the latest information that we have is that there's a 48-year-old, we've been told he's a white male, who is being questioned at this hour. He's being given a mental health evaluation. What if this was a retaliatory attack?
Well, if that is the case, and the indications are leaning in that direction, although there's still that possibility it could be an attack inspired by ISIS because they hate Muslims that they disagree with so much. But if this was a retaliatory attack by an anti-Muslim extremist, then we really need to be on guard and be disturbed, not just because of how horrific the attack itself was, but because of how this plays into the hands, the stated plans of ISIS. For example, I'm holding in my hands right now a 12-page article that was written by ISIS in one of their magazines where they said that they have something called the extinction of the gray zone plan. And what that means is that they view the majority of Muslims that are living in the West, especially Europe, as being viable targets, that they are on the enemy side as ISIS sees it. Then there are those that support ISIS. And then there's the gray zone in the middle. People who have not chosen either side are radical, but not quite on the ISIS side. And according to their thinking, triggering anti-Muslim responses is what will bring that radical gray zone over into their army.
You know, I still think people are angry right now all over the world, and especially in England after the Manchester concert attack, seeing all those kids killed, you know, seeing newlywed couples, you know, driven apart or one killed in the bridge attack. There's anger there, and people don't respond logically, and some people make really stupid mistakes. This didn't surprise me at all. Am I crazy for not being surprised that something like this has happened?
Well, if you look at online comment sections, no, you wouldn't. You would expect something like this to happen because there is a lot of hate out there. But it's more than just responding to the jihadist threat. I wouldn't want. There's an additional ingredient there that we have to zero in on. At some point, if this is an anti-Muslim extremist, he felt that he would be celebrated as a hero for doing this. At some point, some influence came over him that said, yes, you are supposed to treat Muslims as a whole negatively, and doing this is the right thing to do. He didn't just read the news and then say, this is what I'm going to do. There's another factor in there.
Yeah, it's just a shame all around, and just a terrible story. Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, 5:16 here on the East Coast. The Navy dealing with a training standstill after pilots refused to fly over safety concerns.
Leah Gabriel with an exclusive look inside the training cockpit up next. Welcome back to Fox and Friends. First, if one state gets its way, cell phones would be illegal for teenagers. A new proposal in Colorado would ban retailers from selling phones to kids under 13 years old. And if they break the law, they could be fined $500. Leaders say that it was inspired by preteens overusing their devices. The campaign is led by the group of Parents Against Underage Smartphones. Their petition needs 300,000 signatures to get the idea on the ballot next year. And there's now a smartphone app to stop the wall. A college professor in Puerto Rico making a game in which players do everything possible to stop the construction of President Trump's border wall. The game, based on the classic Tetris, if you remember that, taking shots at the president, including ending each round with a score screen saying, "Make America Mexico Again." It's being offered on Apple and Google Play. Rob?
All right, kind of an interesting story here happening today. The Air Force is set to decide whether F-35s at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona will return to the sky, but they still have not pinpointed why 5 pilots have reported oxygen deprivation incidents over the past 5 weeks. That's very dangerous stuff. This as the Navy deals with a training standstill of its own after pilots refused to fly because of safety concerns. The Navy now ordering a full review. Our own Leah Gabriel was first to obtain the results of that review and spoke exclusively with the Navy's #2 officer about them. Leah.
Well, Rob, you know, the bottom line is that the Navy still can't say when the T-45, the Navy's only jet trainer, will start flying again. And the report says finding a solution to the problems has, quote, proved elusive. In other words, there isn't one yet. The issue is with the basic life support systems in both the T-45 trainer and the F-18 Hornet. The systems that are supposed to provide clean, breathable air to aircrew, but reports of incidents where pilots and crew became impaired have been on the rise, increasing as much as 90% in some models last year alone.
I visited Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach for an exclusive look at the latest technology being used to train F-18 pilots to handle aircraft system failures that have been plaguing the fleet.
Looks like we got the feel off the nose there.
The reduced oxygen breathing device allows pilots to experience oxygen loss while flying, but in the safety of a simulator. As a former F-18 pilot, I gave it a try.
We can put this oxygen mask on and slowly decrease that amount of oxygen concentration that we're getting to simulate as best we can exactly what the pilot would experience in the airplane itself.
All set. Thumbs up. All right.
Pilots could become dizzy, euphoric, or even pass out.
So far, it's been very successful in helping people recognize those symptoms before they experience any kind of cognitive or, you know, worse yet, loss of consciousness.
Your heart rate's coming up a little bit. You might notice that yourself.
One training goal? To recognize the symptoms and pull a green ring, which gives the pilot up to 10 minutes of emergency oxygen.
One of the reasons for all this training in the simulator is because pilots are reporting more problems in planes like these. And when you're flying in the air in an F-18, it can be a matter of life and death.
In fact, we learned some pilots are more concerned about their life support systems failing than the risks of combat. The pilots we spoke with in Virginia disagree.
I see no problems operating safely under our current mitigation strategy that we're doing right now.
The Navy Review says it views these episodes as the #1 safety priority and announced an unconstrained resource approach to finding a solution. I spoke with Admiral Bill Moran, who ordered the review.
The system, the aircraft, ought to operate the way it was designed to operate. And it's up to us to figure out how to get that airplane back to that level of performance.
Now, as you saw, in the case of a system failure, pilots have to manually activate emergency oxygen even if they're impaired. Admiral Moran says that an automatic system is the goal. And Rob, he also tells me that if they're not able to get those T-45 training flights going by the end of the summer, it will impact operational readiness. But he says that the Navy is getting close at this point.
This is serious stuff. Yeah, it's very dangerous.
Yeah, all right. And lots of concern for the pilots. Hopefully they'll get this fixed.
Absolutely. All right, Leah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, time now, 5:24 here on the East Coast. All eyes on Georgia this week, where the high-stakes special election is set for tomorrow. Democrats hoping to pull off what would be a huge win. The record-setting votes already pouring in. Plus, More on our top story. A potential terrorist attack being investigated in North London. One person killed, 10 injured, at least 10, after a van slammed into a crowd of people right outside of a mosque. Our live continuing coverage with complete analysis and some guests coming up next. Stay tuned. Back now with a Fox News alert. London's mayor condemning the latest bloodbath as a horrific terrorist attack.
Police say that a man used a van to mow down a crowd of worshippers leaving a mosque, killing one and injuring 10 others. The 48-year-old suspect arrested and being interrogated right now.
Yeah, Benjamin Hall live at the scene in London this morning with details on the hunt for possible accomplices. Benjamin.
Yeah, good morning, Robert and Heather. Yeah, the attack took place just behind me on the street. As you can see here, heavy police presence at the moment. And one real theme we're getting all, which is that this will not divide the community. This must bring the community closer together. But, you know, this is the kind of attack we've seen numerous times over the last few months. A vehicle used to mow down people. Of course, what stands out for this one is that it was an attack on Muslims in this very diverse neighborhood in North London. It had been called a terrorist attack, and it's being investigated by the counter-terrorism police at the moment. It happened just after midnight as worshippers were leaving the local Muslim centre following Ramadan prayers. This van revving his engine, coming off the road and knocking many of them down. They have now arrested the driver. He's a 48-year-old white man. He was pinned to the ground by bystanders until the police arrived, and those two are being called heroes. Eyewitnesses have also reported that as he was being held down, he was saying things along the lines of he wanted to kill Muslims.
He did what he did deliberately to hit and kill as many Muslims as possible.
So all these groups, one of the key objectives they have is to try and fuel division. There is far, far, far more in common we've got with each other that unites us than divides us.
And so at the moment we're just hearing from the police that no other suspects are in fact being searched for, but the Prime Minister will be holding a meeting of Cobra, that's her special terror unit, this evening. So serious implications here and real concerns that this is going to divide the community. You know, there had been an uptick in anti-Islamic attacks here, but nothing on this scale, and of course fears that this is going to further divide communities. Back to you guys.
All right, Benjamin, thank you so much.
Thank you. We're here to weigh in now on the investigation. Steve Rogers, he's the former senior military intel officer on the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. Thank you for joining us, Steve.
Oh, you're welcome.
So one of the first things that came to mind when you heard what was happening as the events continued to unfold in London is that the suspect was being taken in for mental evaluation first.
Yeah, that really caught my attention because a mental evaluation was probably prompted by his behavior when he was in the custody of the police. So a couple of things are going to come out. One is if he is in fact mentally ill, if he has mental health issues, this will lead the police in one direction. If he has no mental health issues, the police investigation will go into another direction. So one of the two directions are this. The first one is if he has a mental health problem, he probably acted alone. There's probably a lot of bias and anger towards the Muslim community, and he targeted them. If he does not have a mental health issue, the question is, who helped him plan this if he did not plan it alone? Did he belong to a cell? Did he belong to a greater group of people who are looking to harm Muslims?
That is, yeah, that's an interesting question. We don't know yet. After Manchester, what we saw at the concert hall, after the London Bridge attack, there's a lot of anger, probably a lot of misplaced anger as well. Was it only a matter of time until some unstable person took an action like this?
Well, absolutely. I'm not surprised that this happened, but I will tell you this. One of the highlights that I'm glad that you all have placed some attention on are the Muslim men who came out and captured this guy and held him for the police to come and take custody of him. That is a very significant act on the part of these individuals because it saves the police a lot of time, a lot of investigative work when looking for a motive. So kudos to them.
Do Muslims overall need to be more vocal in their opposition, or does the media need to give it more coverage if in fact that is happening and we're not covering it as much? What needs to happen there?
Well, both of those things need to happen. I personally would like to see more Muslim leaders come out and really speak out against against these attacks, against these incidents. And the media, yeah, they have to do a little bit more coverage of getting these leaders on and who are speaking out against them. So those of us in the viewing audience, we don't know if they're speaking out unless the media begins to give them the airtime they need to help settle the waves, if you will.
That was the first thing I thought of, too. You know, you have a mosque here that had ties to violence and terrorism and extremism years ago. They cleaned the place out, they cleaned it up, and they brought it back, and now it's a fully functioning, healthy place in the community from all the reports I've read. This is the time for the good Muslims in every community, who are the majority, and a strong majority at that, to come out and say, listen, these people are nuts. We are not a part of this. We want nothing to do with this. You know, we join with the rest of the community, and we just need to figure out the venue to do that.
Well, you're absolutely right. The heroic acts of those two Muslim men this morning in capturing this individual kind of says it all, doesn't it?
All right,
Yeah.
Steve Rogers, thank you so much for your insight again. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And still to come, terror. We have to tell you about this. At least 2 people are dead after a holiday hotspot is stormed by jihadists. Police say that 4 gunmen shouting Allah Akbar, taking dozens of people hostage at a luxury resort popular with Western tourists. Police shooting and killing 3 attackers, and others managed to escape. 1 other at least. All of the surviving hostages have been rescued. That's good news. No word if any Americans were in fact injured.
All right, North Korea branding the United States as a lawless and felonious state. Erratic dictator Kim Jong-un says his diplomats were, quote, literally mugged by police at New York's JFK airport. According to the communist nation, the officials were returning from a UN conference and, quote, a gang of cops took a package from them, and North Korea demanding the U.S. apologize or face grave consequences. So there you have it.
And the injury toll in a deck collapse at a Christian camp now rising to more than 50 people. 2 victims are in critical condition. The frightening incident happening during memorial service at the Glacier Camp over the weekend in Montana. Most of the injured being taken away in ambulances or helicopters. A witness saying that the deck felt, quote, spongy on one side just before collapsing. Police are still investigating.
All right, protecting our lawmakers at any cost. That's what one congressman is vowing to do after being on the baseball field the day that a gunman opened fire on Republican lawmakers last week. Alabama Representative Mo Brooks telling Fox News he'll soon introduce a bill to allow members of Congress to carry guns.
Right now, when we're in Washington, D.C., once we're off the Capitol Hill grounds complex, we're still congressmen, senators, we're still high-profile targets, but we have absolutely no way to defend ourselves. You've got a situation where, yes, this one shooter has been killed, but he's a member of an organization that applauded what transpired on Wednesday.
All right, Brooks says the legislation would allow members of Congress to be armed in places throughout D.C., even where most citizens typically cannot carry a gun. There you go.
Well, now we need to talk about the weather forecast and a possible tornado outbreak in the Northeast.
It's certainly hot enough for it. It seems like it's going to be a stormy one.
Yeah, it feels like it, right?
Yeah.
It's so humid outside, and we could potentially have tornadoes across the East Coast in some of the big cities. So that's the big story we're watching today. Current temperatures very warm and humid along the East Coast. A cold front moving through, powerful cold front, going to bring the potential for hail, damaging winds, and yes, even tornadoes. Also, a lot of Gulf moisture. We have 2 tropical systems we are watching right now that could potentially get named today or tomorrow. So a lot going on. Severe threat through tonight. Millions of people potentially affected by strong to severe storms. Not only that, but flash flooding will also be a concern. A lot of rain in a short period of time. A lot of people affected here. We're going to see certainly airline delays and cancellations, but a tornado threat for all of these people. It happens. It's fairly rare, but people need to be on alert. Other big story across California and the Southwest. We're going to flirt with record highs today. 120 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona. This is going to be a big deal as well. And finally, watching the tropics. This area of concern moving into the Gulf of Mexico. They have just upped this to a 90% chance of formation in the next 48 hours. So already talking about the tropics. Heat across the Southwest, severe storms across the Northeast, and the potential for tropical storms. Back to you.
Yeah, look at the Yucatan just getting crushed by storms.
It's busy. Wow. Summertime.
All right. Janice, thanks so much.
You got it.
5:37 now here on the East Coast. Steve Scalise is still in the hospital, but that's not stopping some on the left from attacking his policies.
Steve Scalise has a history that we've all been forced to sort of ignore on race. He did come to leadership after some controversy over attending a white nationalist event.
We'll have some from the far left learn nothing. We're going to debate that coming up next.
Plus, this Father's Day, the Vice President got a very cute, furry surprise. Meet the newest member of the Pence family. Coming up.
Could be a chance to take the political temperature right now. All eyes on Georgia this week. Polls opening tomorrow in a very heated House race that has now set a record for early voting. Jackie Ibanez joins us now with details on that. Hey, Jackie.
Hey, good morning, Rob. The early voting turnout has been unprecedented. More than 140,000 people casting votes, signaling intense interest in the state's special election. Republican Karen Handel and Democrat Jon Ossoff battling it out to fill the House seat left vacant by Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. Ossoff and Handel nearly deadlock as the polls set to open tomorrow. A Real Clear Politics average showing Ossoff with 49% and Handel with 47%. Just 2% difference there. Both candidates making their last pitches to voters as they hit the final stretch on the campaign trail. Ossoff joined by civil rights leader Congressman John Lewis, urging folks to make a change.
It's important to make your voice heard. Whether or not you support me, you've got to participate in the democratic process. I think this is an opportunity for Georgia to elect some fresh leadership that's focused on delivering results for folks at home, focused on holding people accountable in Washington.
Karen Handel joined on the campaign trail by the man whose seat she's looking to fill. It's Tom Price, rally supporters there to make sure that they turn out to vote.
This has been one crazy race, has it not? I'm telling you, the money is crazy, which tells me we've got to have a crazy high turnout for election on Tuesday for Karen Handel.
All right, speaking of money, Democrats have raised a record $23 million for the race, calling it a referendum on President Trump. Heather?
All right, thank you very much, Jackie. Well, how about some good news? Congressman Steve Scalise, he does remain in serious condition this morning, but that's an upgrade. And he's unable to defend himself, though, from attacks like this from the left.
There's a whole country out there, and a lot of people, at least in my Twitter timeline, and it's a delicate thing because, you know, obviously everybody is wishing the congressman well and hoping that he recovers. But Steve Scalise has a history that we've all been forced to sort of ignore on race. He did come to leadership after some controversy over attending a white nationalist event, which he says he didn't know what it was.
Well, have Democrats finally gone too far? Here to debate, liberal analyst and executive director at Bustle.com, Julie Alvin, and Republican strategist and chairman of GOPAC, David Avella. Thank you both for getting up very early for us this morning.
Good morning.
So, David, I'll start with you and the allegations just made. So, Steve Scalise, he did speak before a series of groups. He talked about tax legislation, and that was back in 2002, and he has repeatedly condemned the group in question. So, is it fair for these type of allegations to be made where he cannot defend himself now?
This is exactly what progressives want to hear. It's why Jon Ossoff in this Georgia special election is able to raise almost $23 million, or more than $23 million, from people outside his district more than inside his district. It's why candidates for state legislature in Virginia this year are raising money from states far away from Virginia. Look, progressives have a lot of time on their hands. Republicans dominate at the federal and the state level, and they know what their activists want to hear is vilification and attacks like this on a guy who's recovering from just being shot last week.
Yeah, it does seem to be just flowing back and forth, though, from both sides already. And as you mentioned, I mean, this was just last week. We couldn't even wait a week until this already started happening. Julie?
I have no love, really, for the way that Joy Reid approached this particular segment. You know, I think that there was one tweet that went out about this that felt a little bit taunting almost of Scalise because of his record. But as far as talking about his record, I do think that, you know, she spent a lot of that segment, in addition to talking about his complicated history with race, talking about how he voted for the AHCA, talking about he co-sponsored a bill for marriage to be between a man and a woman, talking about...
Julie, not to interrupt you, but as you talk about about that, let's bring up that tweet so you continue to discuss it. This tweet by Joy Reid, Representative Scalise, was shot by a white man with a violent background and saved by a black lesbian police officer, and yet, and then you have this picture as you were referencing, you can continue on his voting record.
So that tweet itself felt a little taunting to me, and it felt inappropriate, but I do think that when talking about his voting record, when it comes to the HCA, when it comes to co-sponsoring bill that would have marriage be just between a man and woman, when it talks about his records on gun control, she's just saying that he votes like a Republican generally. So, you know, I personally adamantly disagree with all of Steve Scalise's policies, and I still hope him a full recovery.
So, David, what are your thoughts?
Well, we didn't talk about the fact that Steve Scalise has also voted to keep people both economically and personally secure in his votes over the last couple of years, whether it be trying to put more money in people's pockets, whether it's trying to get regulations that the Obama administration put on that hurt job creation, whether it's trying to make sure we continue to fund the military so it can take the fight to the enemies from around the world who want to do harm to us. Joy Reid didn't bring those votes up. She brought the votes up that gets her Democratic and progressive activist base the most fired up so that they'll put money into campaigns so that they can try to take back Congress.
Also, Reid and Barbara both leaving off the fact that the officer in question, the lesbian officer that they mentioned, was part of Scalise's specific and individual detail. So he worked with her one-on-one on an individual basis. Julie?
I agree. As I said, I don't think that these things are necessarily worth bringing up right now. I do think that the gun control debate specifically is worth bringing up because I am personally curious, given that Steve Scalise was shot by somebody who, you know, I believe was not properly vetted to have a firearm, and, you know, both sides of the aisle are kind of talking about what the answer is here. Is the answer to be with a good guy with a gun, or to not have a shooting situation in the first place because the person with the gun has been properly vetted? So I do think the gun control debate is one that's worth bringing up right now, and I'm curious to see if Scalise's positions on this evolve after he's been the victim of a shooting like this.
We expect to hear more about this actually today with some movement to allow legislators in Washington, D.C. to carry firearms themselves.
Individuals that want to do bad will find the weapon to use. This gentleman used a gun. We saw in London yesterday someone used a van. People who want to do bad will find the weapon of their choice to be able to do that. A protected Americans is the best way, and having good, strong law enforcement, as Steve Scalise was very fortunate to have with his security detail, and making sure Americans can protect themselves and are aware and report bad things. That's how we keep Americans safe.
All right, and our prayers continue to go out to the Scalise family and he himself, and we hope that he fully recovers. Thank you both for joining us today. Julie, David, we appreciate it.
Thanks.